Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi, Kruse. A lot to get to today. We'll be joined by Senate Republican leader John Braun to talk about the legislative session, which wrapped up last night in stunning fashion. If you weren't paying attention, one of the top priorities, what should have been one of the top priorities of lawmakers in Olympia this legislative session was to figure out how to not de facto legalized hard drugs in our state starting on July 1st. And I hate to inform you if I'm breaking this news to you, but it turns out that they could not get that done in time. And if they don't call some sort of special session to address it before July 1st, hard drugs in Washington state, where the drug epidemic is out of control, will be de facto legalized. We'll talk to Senator John Braun not only about that, but about this call for a younger generation of Republican leaders to take over. We're also going to be joined, by the way, by Marysville Mayor John Nearing to talk about if July 1st comes around, hard drugs are decriminalized in Washington by virtue of the legislature not acting, cities and counties are going to have to step up to put their own laws on the books. Some of them, like the city of Marysville, have already prepared for that possibility. So Marysville Mayor John Nearing will join us to discuss his real disappointment in what happened in the legislature last night, but also what they're planning to get in place as a backstop for the failure of the legislature to act. So we're going to get to that. And Nicole, I got to bring you in because it's not something we're going to spend a lot of time on today, but Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon.
Pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah, you got to turn your mic on.
But yeah, I was surprised by that. I was especially Tucker. I'm guessing
100%.
I would think it's on his own because it doesn't make sense for them to let him go.
No,
Don, I think, was asking for it at some point.
So this came out, in case you're not familiar with this news, which has been all over, Fox just came out with a very generic, like, we wish Tucker Carlson all the best, and not a real explanation
just
of
parted ways.
Mm-hmm. What exactly happened. I know there's going to be a lot of, speculation about, was it the Dominion case and all of that, but we don't know, so I'm not going to speculate. Mm-hmm. Don Lemon, on the other hand, put out a little statement,
very clear,
very salty, but he was walking on eggshells. I mean, he had, the whole Nikki Haley thing where he said she's not in her prime, and his female co-anchors were like, So he put out this tweet. He said, "I was informed this morning by my agent that I have been terminated by CNN. I am stunned. After 17 years at CNN, I would have thought that someone in management would have had the decency to tell me directly. At no time was I ever given any indication that I would not be able to continue to do the work I have loved at the network. It is clear that there are some larger issues at play. With that said, I want to thank my colleagues and the many teams I have worked with for an incredible run. They are the most talented journalists in the business, and I wish them all the best." Having worked in media, what does it tell you that his boss didn't come to him, that his boss told his agent, who told him?
Well, I find it hard to believe that he had no prior knowledge of being on eggshells, I guess, or being on a. Normally, you have to have disciplinary.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Notices, and there has to be this buildup, right? So
right.
I find it unbelievable that he had no indication this might happen because legally they must have given him something.
Well, he might have suspected, like, hey, they're not happy with me right now. But I think what he was saying is no indication I wouldn't be able to continue. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, I think this is really significant. So Tucker's gone, which is a huge blow to Fox's ratings and I imagine their revenue. But, he's had that Tucker Carlson Originals thing. And I don't know, does he own that? I have no idea. You would think if his name's on it that way, that he might have ownership over that and he can go do his own thing and make a bunch of money.
He must have a plan.
So, you know what probably happened? Tucker saw that our independent venture was going so well for us. He's like, wow, I'm going to do what Brandi Kruse did.
Right. Or us and Megyn Kelly, maybe, because Megyn actually tweeted something about good for him, as in he's got a bright future, and she probably knew something about it.
Yeah, but obviously much more our show. For sure he's paying attention.
Yes.
So anyway, media landscape, very different. I think corporate media is kind of crumbling before our very eyes.
Really
CNN's
is.
ratings were terrible. But that's all the more reason why we're doing what we're doing now. And I'm sure there will be a ton of comments about that we'll read later on. Reminder, you can always leave comments for subscribers on Patreon or Locals, or you can leave comments on Facebook and YouTube, and we try to get to as many as we can at the end of the show. All right, let's talk about the absolute train wreck that was the end of Washington State's legislative session last night. They call it sine die, which is like a Latin word for like, what does it exactly mean? Hold on, now it's like without day. Sine die is an adverb borrowed from Latin, which literally means without day. It's used in English to describe something as not having a future designation. So basically, the end of the legislative session, they call it sine die, which I think is appropriate because they clearly don't care whether their constituents die. Because, look, you come into this legislative session, and I say that without hyperbole. I mean, they had all the opportunity in the world, last 4 months, to make meaningful progress on public safety issues. And it felt like going into the legislative session that they'd heard enough from their constituents, Democrats and Republicans, to really prioritize public safety. I mean, you look at the record violent crime rates, the increase in homicides, the skyrocketing theft of motor vehicles. And I guess I just don't understand how, as someone elected to serve the public, you wouldn't enter the legislative session with every intention in the world of doing everything within your power to fix that crisis or to make that crisis better. And Democrats in the majority, because remember, Democrats have a trifecta. We're going to talk about people who want to blame Republicans for things, but Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, so they have power. They're in charge. They clearly did not prioritize public safety, and it's stunning to me. So I'm going to give you just a quick refresher on Blake. For those of you who know, I don't want to bore you with it, but I think it's important to revisit the issue just to make sure people know what happened and what we're talking about here. So back in 2021, February 2021, the Washington State Supreme Court struck down our state's felony drug possession statute. It found that it was unconstitutional because it didn't require the state to prove that someone knowingly possessed drugs. It didn't have that key word, that they knowingly possessed drugs. So the state Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional. Now, there would have been a very easy fix for that. Any idea what that was? You just add the word. You add one word to the statute. Knowingly. It could have done it in a day to fix what happened with the state Supreme Court ruling, and then drug possession would have continued as a Class C felony in Washington. But Democrats saw that state Supreme Court ruling and they thought, there's an opportunity to decriminalize drugs. There is an opportunity to take it easy on people who are abusing drugs and oftentimes, as a result, committing criminal acts to further their drug habit. So 2021 goes by and they pass like a little BandAid fix, just a little BandAid to get us by, where it basically said that if you're using drugs and a police officer catches you, they have to twice, instead of prosecuting you, they have to defer you into treatment. And then on the third time, they can actually arrest you and prosecute you, except it didn't have any sort of method to track it. So you could say, all right, this is warning number 1, but the next time an officer stops someone, they don't know they've had a warning. So they're like, oh, here's treatment option number 2. So it just meant nothing. So anyway, 2021 passes, 2022 passes. The issue with the BandAid fix is that it has a sunset. It expires in July of this year, in just a couple months. And so if they didn't pass a permanent solution this legislative session, in July, we wouldn't have any law on the books for drug possession. So the possession of any kind of illegal drug starting July 1st would be de facto legalized if they didn't come up with a solution. So in 4 months, they had to come up with a solution. There were wonderful bipartisan proposals. And of course, Democrats in the majority kept watering them down, and then waiting till the very last minute. One of the very last things they did in the legislative session in the House is for Democrats to bring a watered-down Blake fix, also called the Blake fake, to the floor for a vote. And here's what happened. So Republicans decided, look, we're not supporting it. It has been watered down to the point of ineffectiveness. And there's a backstop here. If we don't pass, it's either pass a weak bill that's not going to do anything, or we leave the issue to cities and counties who have the political will to do something, and we let them deal with it. So no surprise, Republicans were opposed.
I don't agree with incarceration. I don't agree with felonies, but incarcerated people are alive, Madam Speaker. And if we can get them help in the system we have now through drug court, they will be alive for tomorrow.
Now, here's what some of us didn't expect, because when you think about it this way, Democrats control the floor and what comes to the floor. because they're in the majority and they are the Speaker of the, they have the Speaker of the House. So typically, if it's last day of the legislative session, you're going to bring a big, important issue like this to the floor for a vote. You would think that you already know that you have the votes to pass it. I don't know where they got their math wrong, but in addition to every single Republican voting against it, some Democrats also decided to vote against it, albeit for a much different reason, because they felt as if this watered down bill went too far to criminalize substance abuse.
Unfortunately, I can't vote for this bill because it's a gross misdemeanor. And having gone to jail and detoxed from drugs in jail and know the conditions and the dehumanization of that experience and the separation from my children and the consequences that has had on my life in every way, I cannot replicate that harm.
So while just before that floor debate started, Governor Jay Inslee, who has said at various points throughout the session that he doesn't want drug legalization, but he hasn't really been out front and forceful on this issue. So yesterday at like 2:30 in the afternoon, with hours left in the legislative session, Jay Inslee finally emerges from whatever cave he usually sits in during the session and debate on important issues, and he releases a video essentially encouraging the House to pass this watered-down bill.
Following the Blake decision by the state Supreme Court, the legislature has needed to reform our drug enforcement and treatment laws. I think they've done so this year in a couple ways. One, they're not decriminalizing drugs, but they are providing a way to make sure people get into treatment. And ultimately, treatment is what really works with people. But they also preserved a criminal sanction to make sure people understand they have to go into treatment or there is jail time. So both got done this year. I think that'll be a good result.
Yeah, but it wasn't a good result because, as I just pointed out, Republicans voted against it unanimously, and enough Democrats voted against it in the House where this was the final result.
The Speaker's about to open the roll call machine. The Speaker has opened the roll call machine.
Madam Speaker, there are 43 yeas, 55 nays, 0 excused.
Having not received a constitutional majority, engrossed second substitute Senate Bill 5536, as reported by the conference committee, is not passed.
Yeah, and that is incredibly embarrassing for House Democrats. And it is the fault of House Democrats that the legislative session ended yesterday, and starting July 1st, we'll have de facto drug legalization at a state level in Washington. Now, you might have some people wondering, well, first, can you avoid that at all? I will say Inslee had, I stay up at 11 p.m. and watch Inslee's press conferences, so you don't have to. Inslee did have a post-session press conference where he suggested that maybe there might be a brief special session between now and July 1st to come to some sort of consensus and actually pass a bill. Here's what he said.
It is unacceptable to me.
Sure
it is unacceptable to the state of Washington to decriminalize drugs. And in the absence of passage of a bill, that's what would happen in the state of Washington. We expect the Washington State Legislature to produce a bill that will not decriminalize drugs, will provide measures for treatment, and will provide some sanction for those who fail to accept treatment. This is my expectation. It is the expectation of the people of the state of Washington. Tonight, we had 43 representatives willing to step up to the plate. They were all Democrats. Not one single Republican helped on this so that we wouldn't decriminalize drugs. Not one. I'm disappointed by that.
Do you realize the level of gaslighting you have to be comfortable with to believe that Republicans are even a fraction of a percent responsible for this? For the governor to even suggest, could it have passed if Republicans had voted for it? Yes. But you gave them a bill that was so bad that they had no choice but to kill it, leading to drug legalization at the state level to allow cities and counties to be able to pass laws that are stricter. Because if the watered-down version of the bill had passed, and this gets to the crux of the issue for some of you being like, why would Republicans vote to allow de facto drug legalization? If they'd passed the watered-down version of the bill, which would have had really no impact on the drug crisis on our streets, then it had a local preemption, meaning no other city or county could have drug possession laws more strict than the state law. And that is problematic because the state law, if they passed that, wouldn't have done anything. So let's just say they can't get together on something before July 1st, because let's be honest, they had 4 months to deal with this. And now you're saying that they're going to spend even more time and be able to achieve something that they couldn't achieve in 4 months. And you have to have a special session to do that. That's ridiculous on his face. But also, I wouldn't count on that. So what's going to happen between now and July 1st is city and county leaders who actually have a backbone and care about the safety of their communities are going to pass their own laws that allow their officers, their sheriff's departments, to arrest people, and they're going to prosecute people for drug possession. Now, if you've been following the show, there are already some cities and counties who have done this. Just in anticipation of this scenario playing out, they have put laws on the books, passed laws that would take effect July 1st if drugs are legalized de facto in Washington state on July 1st. One of them is Marysville Mayor John Nearing, and he was nice enough to come on and react to what happened last night, but also talk about what the plan is for his city and other cities between now and July. Mayor Nearing, thanks for being here.
Glad to. Thank you.
So first, there's a difference, obviously, between what the Senate passed and then what failed in stunning fashion in the House last night. Did you support the version that passed in the Senate?
Absolutely. Very much supported that. Appreciated particularly Senator Robinson's efforts, who we worked really closely with, and supported that right to the end. If they had just kept that language, we would have all been talking about a different situation right now.
Yeah. And so obviously they didn't. And I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, you are in political circles. Were you surprised that, I guess just for me, when you're Democrats and you're in control, and that's like the last sort of thing you're going to do for the session, I guess I'm surprised they brought it to the floor for it to fail.
Yeah, I was watching it live last night on TVW. I was shocked. I thought for sure, like you said, that, at 8, 9 o'clock at night on the last day of session, that was going to pass. I think it does highlight a problem. This is certainly one of the most, if not the most important thing they were tackling in this year's session, and waiting till the 11th hour. Yeah, I know we were on the phone as mayors, spent most of our Sunday on this, and here you are. You're left with really no choice but to say either vote against, to recommend either vote against it or don't vote against it. Whereas previously throughout the weeks, we would just offer our thoughts on it and allow them to, move forward. But that's the problem. When you throw this out at the 11th hour, it leaves nobody any choice but to just vote it up or down at that point. I think that's a real disservice. I wish this I think should have been prioritized earlier.
Yeah, it's a shame. And, now Inslee's talking about, he hasn't said the word special session, but if they're going to pass something before July 1st, that's what it would have to be. And it's just such a bummer. Like, you need a special session. You just had all this time to do this and couldn't get it done. You mentioned that you spent time as a mayor, and as did other mayors, and I know there were some statements released by a lot of mayors, that you spent some time talking to legislators. Can you bring us into those conversations as much as you're willing for how those sort of the final negotiations were playing out?
Yeah, thank you. We've got a group here in Snohomish County called Mayors and Business Leaders for Public Safety. It's 16 mayors all across the ideological spectrum that are united on needing a solution for this problem, and a number of business leaders as well. And we had 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats from Snohomish County, a bipartisan coalition that we worked with. I think we first met in November or December of last year, and all the way through session. And honestly, I think, those legislators were in large part responsible for what was a really good step forward in Senate Bill 5536 as it was originally constituted. And Senator June Robinson deserves a great deal of credit for that. And so we worked closely with that group, offering and those representatives, senators and House of Representatives members were very good about sending us striker language and whatnot, allowing us to weigh in on it, which we did throughout session. And so we feel that, the model that they set, that bipartisan group, was the solution. And when you look at the Senate bill, Brandi, I think it was 14 Republicans and 14 Democrats voted for it. That's the absolute definition of a bipartisan solution. And we rarely get that on these big issues. So we had locked in a truly bipartisan solution. That was by no means a perfect bill. It didn't give us mayors everything we wanted at all, nor did it give the sheriffs and police chiefs or the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys everything they wanted, but everybody could live with it. What we would call, I guess, a solid, reasonable step forward. And why we had to go then and mess with that, it's really frustrating, I think, to a lot of people.
Yeah, what was it about the House version that you just could not abide?
Yeah, I think there was a few things. One, there was too much preemption of local control, particularly on things like harm reduction programs. We feel that when you bring needle exchanges and things like that into communities, it only encourages the type of destructive behavior that we're witnessing. And so we don't believe that local jurisdictions should be preempted from not allowing certain harm reduction programs in their community. If you want to have them, that's fine. But cities like ours that don't should not be preempted by a state law. And the House version did some of that. And it was, that was very, very concerning. Also, there's just not enough accountability measures that existed in the original Senate version. And there was some language issues with knowingly possess and use. And that's a critical thing to take a look at. In other words, if we have a number of store owners that'll contact us and say, hey, our employee went out to drop trash off, there's somebody doing fentanyl behind our store. Well, if an officer can show up 3, 4, 5 minutes later and see the paraphernalia and it's obvious that they've used and they can prosecute, and we can prosecute under that, that's one thing, which the Senate version had dealt with. But then the House version said knowingly possess and use. And so many prosecuting attorneys, in fact, WAPA felt that you would have to actually have an officer witness that drug use. Well, that's an entirely different thing to have an officer get there in time to actually witness the drug use. And so you could be looking at a similar situation to what we've had the last 2 years, where you've got a bunch of officers doing their job, running around getting this, and then we can't prosecute any of this. And we're right back to square one. And I'll tell you what, it wouldn't take long for those using drugs to realize that, hey, as long as I'm not witnessed using, I'm going to be okay. And that's just unacceptable. There was real easy language that was suggested by AWC, WASPIC, Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, to fix that. And it just wasn't incorporated. And that's a big problem. Plus, there was some things like some language around that would have incentivized 6 months of treatment instead of the 12 months of substantial compliance that we all wanted. In other words, you could plead guilty and only have to do 6 months. So perversely incentivizing people to do half the treatment that they're probably going to need, we thought was a bad move as well. But the whole goal here is to get people into treatment and through treatment. And the House version just watered it down enough where it doesn't do us nobody wants to throw a bunch of people in jail. That's not any of our goals.
Right.
We're well beyond that. But if we can't get people through treatment, guess what? They're going to be right back out on the streets, stealing to feed their drug habit and dying on the streets and all the things we're facing today.
So what would you like to happen from here? As I mentioned, the governor is suggesting that this has to be done before July 1st when we would reach the point of de facto legalization. But cities like yours, you've already taken the initiative to pass your own ordinances that will allow officers to arrest people for having drugs in public, possessing drugs, using drugs. Yeah. So part of me is just content with letting it be like that. Cities that have the political will to do what they need to do, depending on their issue, they can do it. But what do you think is the best outcome between now and July 1st?
Yeah, for us in Marysville, if we can't get a bill that's an adequate step forward, you're exactly right. We would rather control our own destiny. We had an ordinance in place before the state preempted ours a year and a half ago. It was working. We'd gotten over 150 people through treatment. And so we're fine going back to that. But I'll tell you, because we'll take care of it. Our council voted that ordinance through 7-0 and it had my full support. And our officers are ready to get back out and handle that as of July 1st. But I will tell you this, I also want to see a statewide recovery here. We're a mess right now. And so I think that the true solution for Washington State is a state bill that is crafted much like Senate Bill 5536 was originally constituted. So, we're going to take care of business in Marysville one way or another, unless we're preempted by the state. But, we don't want people to just leave Marysville and go do this in another city that maybe doesn't have the political will to do that. And so statewide, we need some leadership and we need people to realize the mess that we're in. And and make some of the changes that, or honestly, just go back to Senate Bill 5536 as it was originally constituted. That would be my preference. I think that's what's best for the state of Washington. Yeah, so I would hope that would happen. But if it's going to be a watered down bill like it was yesterday, as we clearly stated, our mayor's group, we would rather no bill at all than a watered down bill that won't do the job, because then it will allow at least certain cities to do what we would do here in Marysville. And that'll, I guess, in a sense, give the state some models to look at on both sides, and see what works.
Yeah. Let me just ask you to wrap up, Mayor Nearing. You're a reasonable guy. I think, and I've told you I have a very high opinion of you and your ability to approach your job in a nonpartisan way. When you look at, I guess, what was prioritized and not prioritized this session, the fact that inarguably one of the most critical issues was left till the 11th hour, and then it went down in a ball of flames. What do you make of, when you sit back and think about it, the state of politics in Washington and where we find ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's unavoidable to come to the conclusion that not enough of the leadership in our state realizes what a serious problem this is, or they're just not willing to do what it takes to fix it. And I think that's a huge problem. This should have been at the top of the priority list. We should have, been dealing with this final version a long time ago, and we would have had a very different situation. So yeah, it is very discouraging to myself, and I think to a number of others, that something that is so critical that we've been dealing with for over a year and a half now was left till the 11th hour, when we were thrown language that you barely with time to digest it on a Sunday afternoon. It's a big problem. And I think you're going to run into the same situation in a special session unless you really get everybody on board ahead of time. And I think that can be done. We're not that far away from it, really, Brandi. But there's some critical pieces that we're missing in that House version. I just cited, I think, 3 or 4 of them with you that have to be fixed, I think. If they're willing to fix those, I think we can get to a state solution. Probably not one that we'll all be 100% happy with, but we can all live with it.
Yeah, and that's the art of compromise. And I'll give a lot of credit to you, to your Snohomish County delegation and mayors, as you said, across the ideological spectrum, who've come together and said, hey, we have an issue. What can we do to address it? I think Snohomish County is a great example for what can be done, how we should be addressing this issue. So Marysville Mayor John Nearing, we appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, always good to have John on and his just common sense perspective on things. And it's a tough position cities are put in. I mean, they want a state solution for a lot of reasons. But it's nice to know that there are cities across the ideological spectrum that are ready to step up if there isn't a solution in place. And in fact, John's son, who happens to be a Snohomish County council member, last night said that he'll be introducing for all of Snohomish County unincorporated areas a similar effort just to try to put a backstop in place. So the question is, of course, can something that they couldn't accomplish in 4 months be accomplished behind the scenes and then passed in some sort of special session? So in a moment, we're going to bring on Senate Republican leader John Braun to talk about that. But first, I just want to note, since we're going to talk to the Senate Republican leader, that something else a little crazy happened yesterday, and that is House Minority Leader J.T. Wilcox, so the ranking Republican in the state House, announced that he was going to step down from his position of leadership. He actually made the announcement officially on TVW. Here's a clip from that.
This is not supposed to be a full-time job or a long career. And I think I've got 2 other things that have to do with newer people in my caucus and younger people. I've got very, very talented leaders, and I think that there are at least a handful of people that will be better at this job than I am. And the other thing that I think is, we have come through so much bitterness in the last few years that, someone in my generation and my age is never going to be able to escape that. We need to give leaders across our country an opportunity to make a new start, forget all of the hatred that has arisen as a result of ideology, conflict, some of it violent, COVID and our reaction to COVID. And I want my caucus to start fresh. And the best way to do that is for them to start fresh with some different leadership.
Yeah, That's something a leader says. And I will say I have the highest opinion of JT Wilcox. I've had the privilege to interview him many times throughout the years, go down to Wilcox family farms and interview him when I was at Fox 13. He's just a really, really nice guy. And I think that what he said there shows his leadership and his recognition that, hey, maybe it's time for a younger generation to take over some of these leadership roles. But what he said at the end about, the vitriolic place that politics has come to, and his sort of thought that if we can get some new, fresh voices that haven't been part of that infighting, haven't been part of that cross-party fighting, and some of the really divisive things we've been through, like COVID, his hope is that maybe that is more productive. And I think that's a very big thing of JT Wilcox to do and to say. Also surprised at the very big thing the governor did. Governor Inslee managed to put out a nice sentiment about a Republican. He said, and it was kind of funny too. He said on Twitter, "I've worked with Rep. Wilcox for many years, and he's a good egg." Do you get it? Do you get it, Nicole?
Oh, I got it.
Okay, good. Wilcox eggs.
I thought it was very clever.
That's very nice. Thank you for your leadership and service. Now, I don't appreciate the fact that after he sent that out, just a few hours later, he was blaming Republicans for the Blake fix failing. So a little bit two-faced, but I'll give Governor Jay Inslee that. So anyway, I am sure that we'll have Representative Wilcox on the show. I'd like to take time to really sit down with him for an in-depth interview about some of his sentiments there, about the future of the Republican Party, the future of politics, now that he's going to be out of a leadership position. But we'll work on getting him on the show to discuss all of those things. But we did get Senator John Braun, who is the Senate Republican leader, to agree to come on the show today to not only talk to us, of course, about what happened with the legislative session, the crash and burn of the Blake fix, but also about some of the things that JT Wilcox pointed out there in his remarks. Senator Braun, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me on, Brandi.
What are you going to do post-session? What are you going to do for your wife post-session, I guess, is the biggest question.
Well, she's going to get a lot more of my attention than she's had over the last couple of months, that's for sure. Whether she'll like it or not, I don't know, but that's how it's going to work.
Good. She deserves it. You've got a good one there. So you make sure that you're paying enough attention to her, but not too much. So we're going to get to what happened at the end of the session with the Blake fix in a moment, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about House Minority Leader J.T. Wilcox announcing on the final day of the session that he is going to step down from that leadership role. Your reactions to that, sir?
Well, JT has been a great partner in the legislature and a very good friend. We've worked together for the better part of a decade. I have a great deal of respect for him. I am, on the one hand, pleased that he did it on his terms, and he did it at the right time, and he left a very much stronger caucus behind him. I will miss him, and while I look forward to working with whoever they select as his predecessor, I think he's been a extraordinary leader for Republicans in our state, and pushed hard on issues that are important to Republicans, but also helped Republicans understand how to be successful in the state of Washington.
Yeah, we also, and you know this, can't deny the fact that there is a segment of the party that has been a little cruel to him. I'm just going to use that word. And I saw it yesterday when he announced that he wasn't going to seek his leadership role. There's a segment further to the right in the party that, calls him a rhino and whatever sort of labels you want. How do you sort of, as a party, get past that infighting in order to be more productive?
Well, I wish I had the exact answer to that. I'm not sure there is, but I think I know one thing for sure. If we're going to work our way through this, we have to be honest about the situation we're in. We have to be clear-eyed that if we're going to win in the state of Washington in elections and bring more balance and I think a better future to the state of Washington, we can't fight with ourselves. We have to recognize what's most important to the people of the state of Washington and not get distracted by some of the things that have pulled us apart over the last few years. I mean, it's just the way it is. And some people don't like that message. And JT has delivered it repeatedly without flinching. And I admire that. And I hope that as long as we continue to say, look, if we want to be relevant, we want to fight for our communities in the state of Washington. And in our state and in our country, fighting means winning elections. to win elections in the state of Washington, you have to run on the things people care about most and be thoughtful about the things people care about most. I think JT has done that, and I hope as a party we continue to do that.
Yeah, and it's weird that it's controversial because you're right. It is just so common sense. Like, do you want to be in a position to win and to actually make changes on some of these things or not? And that's what it boils down to. One more thing on JT before we move on to Blake. He said that he thinks it's time for a new generation of leaders in the Republican Party. He says, I believe it's also time for a generational change in our politics in a broader sense. Experience is valuable in government, but it does have a shelf life. I hope that all across our state and the country, we can recognize the value of a newer generation of leaders who will have less investment in the antagonisms that have consumed the last years. Do you agree?
I do. I think you only get so much time in a job like this. You should do your best. You should work hard. But you should also, I think, as JT has done, recognize when it's time for new leaders and give them a chance. There are great people that I'm sure will follow after him and me and others. We need that change to be healthy and be vibrant and effective, both in Washington and nationwide.
All right. Talking about Blake, we'll get to the substance of it, but after it failed in the House, Democrats couldn't get together as a caucus to push it through. Republicans obviously weren't going to help because it was a bad bill, and there is a backstop, which is local control. Governor Inslee came out, Republican leadership came out and had the audacity to blame Republicans for this mess, which I've said is just deeply dishonest. Is it surprising to you, given the conversations and the work you've done behind the scenes, that that would be a message that they would put forth as opposed to personal accountability?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by the governor, frankly. The governor's been absent from this discussion for the last 105 days. He's never in any meaningful way weighed in. He and his staff had no idea of what negotiations occurred, either when we first passed, I think, a good Blake bill out of the Senate some weeks ago, or the negotiations over the last 4 or 5 days as we tried to get a bipartisan Blake bill across the line. He wasn't involved, and so the fact that he'd weigh in after the fact, well, we all know how Governor Inslee operates. He's not interested in, this wasn't a climate change bill. He wasn't interested. He's just kind of protecting himself now. I was a little surprised that some of the Democratic leaders, in particular, the Democratic leaders in the Senate that came out blaming this on Republicans. Two things I'd point out. One, we are not in the majority. We don't get to decide what comes to the fore. Were we in that position, this bill would have gotten passed. I can say that absolutely. And I can also say absolutely, because we all know what happened. Republicans in the Senate stepped up and provided the votes to pass a good Blake bill several weeks ago. That bill passed down the middle with nearly, I think, exactly even Senate Republican and Democrat votes. Had that bill, and I would just add, that's a bill that was supported by the cities, by the prosecutors, by law enforcement, that they thought they could actually implement. Had that bill been brought for a vote in the House, it would have passed the same way with an overwhelming majority. There's no question in my mind. Instead, they brought a bill that didn't have the support of the cities, didn't have the support of the prosecutors, didn't have the support of law enforcement, and they're surprised it didn't pass? They've been at this for a while. They know how to count votes. They were just unwilling to govern when it mattered most. That's what happened.
So what do you think should happen from here? Because, we just spoke with Marysville Mayor John Nearing. They have a law that's ready to go into effect July 1 if they need that backstop. I mean, nobody wants de facto drug legalization, but at least there's the opportunity for cities and counties who have the political will to do something about it. But, the governor, he didn't use the word special session, but he said a bill needs to come together before July 1st. So take us through what you think is going to happen between now and July 1st to that end.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how serious the governor is. Again, he just weighed in at the last moment, and I don't know if he'll follow through or not. I think there's 3 possible outcomes. I think the one that we're set up for right now, which is there is no state law, therefore cities and counties can put an ordinance in themselves that works for their communities that can go up to a gross misdemeanor. I think that happens in many parts of the state, and I think that's not that's given what we have in front of us, that's not a bad option. I would expect them to do that. I think they will do it in many parts of the state, and I think we'll be okay. I don't think it's the best outcome. I think the best outcome is to have a statewide solution that's lined up and consistent, but it has to be workable. It has to be a real solution that provides a real path, and nobody's questioning that it should lead to treatment, that we want to get folks the treatment they need, get them back on. Nobody questions that. That's not a partisan issue. It's that we have to give a workable solution, the real tools to locals. That could happen. I mean, we could have some negotiation. I think I could see a path where we have some negotiations outside session, and we come back for a brief short session and pass a statewide solution. If it's a good solution, I would welcome that. Much like the one that we passed out of the Senate some weeks ago, I think that will work. And I think the cities and counties and everybody would like that. I think the worst solution, this is the one thing I worry about, is the Democrats decide, okay, we're going to go do it ourselves. We're going to offer something that looks a lot like our current law that has been an absolute failure, that's cost many lives to drug overdose over the last 2 years. That's the worst solution. I would hate to see a situation where they came back and they tried to do it just with Democrat votes that was just an unworkable solution like we have right now. Because here's the thing they have to understand: if they do that, that preempts the cities and counties from doing something themselves.
Right. And I agree. That is the most, I'm worried that that's probably what's going to happen. And that's a bummer, because you guys showed in the Senate that it is possible on a bipartisan basis to come up with something workable that works for cities, counties, law enforcement, prosecutors. So if they go the lonely route and do it themselves, which I wouldn't put past them, I am a little terrified of that. You know, if you're a betting man, I mean, I think what frustrates me and what should frustrate citizens is this inarguably should have been one of the top priorities heading into the session. And 4 months have gone by, and they leave this till the 11th hour, and then it fails. And now they're talking about a special session, even if it's a short one. I think there's this feeling that you really could not get that done in 4 months. So what would lead you to get it done in a special session? So I guess just what would you say to citizens who are very frustrated with that process?
Well, I don't think there's a special session unless there's an agreement. So I don't think we'd come back to town and sit around and try and negotiate. We'd have to negotiate and then come back. And I just don't know. We're open. We have been open the whole time. You know, even the bill that we passed, it's not the bill we would have written. We don't love everything about it, but we worked hard and we brought Republican votes to solve the problem. We thought it was important that we govern. And I think the Senate Democrats, to a certain extent, did. As I said, I was a little disappointed in their comments after the fact. I don't think the House Democrats did that at all. House Republicans were absolutely willing. And I can tell you, absolutely, right up until the very last hour, House Republicans, Senate Republicans were offering solutions that would bring along the cities, bring along the prosecutors, bring along the law enforcement, and give a real solution. And we would bring along Republican votes that would get across the line. I think that's still possible. The longer it goes and the more kind of bomb throwing we have out there, the harder it gets, because, look, we're willing to help. We're willing to govern. We're willing to get the laws that the people of the state of Washington need and deserve. But we don't need to be vilified for it, especially not from the minority. That's not helpful or productive.
Yeah. On the public safety front, to me, we're at record crime rates, homicide rates, stolen vehicles are through the roof. It's just undeniable that we're in the midst of a serious crime crisis. Do you think coming out of this legislative session, the people of Washington are going to be safer than when we went in?
Sadly, no, I don't think so. We passed a pursuit bill that is, as I've said, a half step in the right direction. Does no harm, and Republicans supported it for that reason. We weren't going to kill a bill that gets us a little bit better. But when you talk about the lawlessness, it's reckless driving, it's driveaways, it's auto theft, and I get that the majority wanted to protect harm to people first, and we don't disagree with that. But the lawlessness doesn't come from that. We don't have a lot of high-speed chases as a result of murder or domestic violence. We do have them as a result of reckless driving, as a result of auto theft, and people are getting hurt as a result. So until we face those problems, I don't think the people who are committing these crimes will be in any way meaningfully deterred, and which means our current situation continues. That's what I'm frustrated with. These were our top two priorities. We've talked about Blake decision and the pursuit issue. The very most important things we had to do in this session. One, we got kind of partway done, and one failed miserably because they pushed it right up to day 105 and didn't work with the Republicans in the House to get it done. And the House Republicans were ready to get this done. They were absolutely the same position the Senate Republicans. They wanted to support a reasonable bill. All they needed was a chance to vote on it.
Yeah, and I should note for people who are watching or listening that we are going to have two of your Democratic colleagues on later in the week, Senator John Lovick and Senator Mark Mullet, and we'll talk to them about some of these same issues and offer them an opportunity to share their perspective on it. Senator Braun, before I let you go, as you just said, public safety was a top priority. It was for me as well. And we spent a lot of time and attention on the two issues we just discussed. Is there anything that you're really happy about this session that maybe went under the radar amid all these controversies?
Well, while not everything, I don't like everything in it. I think one of the big successes, not is highlighted, is our budget. The operating budget, well, I'd say all the budgets really, but the operating budget in particular, by no means a bipartisan budget. There's things in there that we do not like, but structurally, it took the Senate Democrats in particular, Senator Christine Rolfes welcomed input from the Republicans. I think that was the right thing for the state. And look at the growth. The growth rate is less than half what it's been in the last few bienniums, much closer to the growth rate of inflation and personal income growth. We have no new taxes, and that was a fight to the end. But no new general taxes for the people of the state of Washington, and even a few tax reductions in specific areas, and then a reserve that's meaningful. These are big structural wins, and it's not top of the headline like some of the issues, but those are important. And I could tell you, with more time, we could dive deeper into the budget, and there are things in there that are absolutely Republican priorities that made it through the end. And I think that's a win, maybe not a highly visible win, but a big win for the people of the state of Washington long term. Do
you want to highlight one of them, one of the wins that you think Republicans had in that budget?
Well, I would, if I had to highlight one in particular, I would go back to the things I mentioned before. We really need more time to dig deep into it, but no new taxes, I think, is the biggest. And recognize in the last 2 weeks, there was a serious push for a gigantic input increase in the property taxes, both state and local, that would have been absolutely wrong for the state of Washington, and a real estate excise tax that would have been very harmful to renters in particular. It would have affected the sale and resale of multifamily housing and would have driven up rent costs. These are the wrong things for the state of Washington when we have such a housing challenge to begin with.
Yeah, no new taxes, but not for lack of trying. I'm glad it didn't end up in there.
That's right. It's hard to believe at the very last minute where they roll out, in fairness, the REIT was kind of hanging out the whole time, but it wasn't in either of the proposed budgets. And then at the end, this big push, we got to get our tax fix done, and it was just bad for the state of Washington. We worked hard to stop it. I'm very pleased we did. Actually, I said, if I got a moment, one other thing I will highlight in the budget that I think deserves attention is the funding for special education. We have fought for that. I have personally fought for that for the better part of 5 years to address, and this doesn't fix it entirely, but this is a big move towards properly funding special education for our students around the state. It's something that we needed to do. It's the right thing to do, and we finally got there in a big way. So I'm pretty proud of that.
Great. Thanks for highlighting it. Thank you for the conversation, Senate Republican Leader John Braun. We appreciate it. And so, interesting to hear the thoughts on JT Wilcox, again, deciding that it's time for maybe some new leadership in the House, at least. I didn't hear from Senator Braun that he thinks it's time for new leadership in the Senate or that he was going to step down and do what JT Wilcox has done. I'm not suggesting he should. I'm just saying that doesn't sound like something that's going to happen. As I noted, we just heard, the Republican perspective on how the session ended and what's happening with possible drug legalization in Washington state, which would be disastrous. Coming up this week, we're going to have two of Senator Braun's Democratic colleagues on the show to discuss a variety of things that happened this session. Senator John Lovick will be joining us on the show on Wednesday, and on the Thursday show, we'll be joined by Senator Mark Mullet. We'll have some clips of those interviews, and we'll have the expanded interviews along with, have we confirmed Skylar?
Yeah, he's confirmed.
Great. Republican State Representative Skylar Rude on the Sunday show as well, because we want to talk to him about Senate Bill 5599. He gave one of, I think, the best speeches that I've seen on that bill, the bill that has to do with allowing kids to run away from home and go to a shelter. So we have a lot of content this week and interviews when it comes to legislative voices. It was hard to get them in studio during the session. They were busy bees. And so now that the session is wrapped up, we're going to have quite a few of them stopping by the studio on both sides of the aisle to talk to us. All right, this is not the last that we're going to discuss this issue of what happened with the failure of lawmakers to reach an agreement on criminalizing drug possession. I know it's ridiculous that this is even an issue that we still have to discuss. We'll talk about it coming up. But first, methodworks.com, is one of our wonderful sponsors on the show. And this is really for if you're listening and you have a small to medium-sized business, maybe you've got 5 employees or 50 employees, and you need help with tech. This could be anything. I mean, this could be getting your employees set up with computers. It could be helping with data security and data privacy, and also a 24-hour help desk. What I like about MethodWorks, one-stop shop for any technology needs that you might have as a small business. And since they're local, you've got a local help desk you can call 24 hours a day. It's not some big conglomerate where you're like, are they going to answer my phone? Are they going to be helpful? MethodWorks is run by Mark Harmsworth, who has 30 years at Microsoft and went on to work in the Washington State Legislature as a very pro-business Republican and started his own thing at MethodWorks. And the other nice thing is, it's something you might not think about a lot as a small business owner, but they're offering a free security review for you and 1 month of free security monitoring. Can tell you how to protect your data, your customer data, and they're doing that just for undivided viewers and listeners. So again, if you run a small business, I know because I just started my small business and tech needs were like one of the last things I thought about, but it's so critically important just to get that off your plate. So visit methodworks.com. methodworks.com, and make sure to tell them that you heard about them on the Undivided podcast so you can get that free security review and 1 month of free security monitoring. All right, let's continue this conversation about the fact that we're going to just de facto legalize drugs in Washington state, which is the worst possible idea I can think of. The following segment is brought to you by our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure while you're there you sign up for their newsletter so you can get notified about important opportunities to make your voice heard on critical issues. Now, I was watching the debate late into the evening on the last day of the legislative session yesterday as they were deciding whether to pass this truly weak, watered-down solution to the Blake decision. And, you know, as much as I was annoyed with some of the Democrats who voted against it because they thought it went too far. I mean, you actually had Democrats who thought this weak version of the bill went too far in criminalizing substance abuse. I will say I was kind of equally as annoyed with Democrats who were standing there in support of it and acting completely frustrated that it had come down to that point. Acting completely baffled as to why on the last day of the legislative session, there would be a possibility that they wouldn't pass a bill and that starting July 1st, drugs would be de facto legalized. Here is just a couple clips.
My city and the cities that are in that East Puget Sound region are asking me, Larry, please do something. Your vote, Representative Springer, a no vote on this bill is to say to them, I don't care.
I'm voting yes because I'm fearful of what this bill failing would do to my community and to communities across the state. This bill failing and my desire to vote yes is because I fear that drug use will be different on one side of the street than it is on another.
And there were so many Democrats who supported this watered-down fix, whose remarks on the floor of the House sounded just like that. They say they're scared, they're fearful about what de facto decriminalization of drug possession could do to their communities. They say they're hearing from their constituents, please do something. And the reason that annoys me is we never should have been in that position in the final hours of the 2023 legislative session. Need I remind you that Democrats had to add one word, just one word, to our drug possession law to avoid all of this. When the Washington State Supreme Court struck down our felony drug possession statute in February of 2021, they said they did so because the law that was on the books did not have the word knowingly, that it didn't require the state to prove that someone knowingly possessed illegal drugs in order to convict them. So after, in February 2021, the law was struck down, lawmakers in Olympia that same year led by Democrats, could have made one simple addition to the law that would have avoided all of this. They could have added the word knowingly, and this would have been done. Drug possession would have continued to be a crime in Washington state, and we could have all moved on. Instead, it was the decision of Democrats to try to water down the law. It was the decision of Democrats that they no longer wanted drug possession to be a felony. They wanted to look at a different way to pursue this issue, which is fine, but 2021 goes by without a real fix, 2022, and then 4 months of the 2023 legislative session when you knew that if you did nothing, then July 1st we'd have de facto legalization of drug possession. And you want to sit on the floor of the House in the final hours of the legislative session and act upset? Act upset with people who are going to vote against that bill because they didn't think it went far enough? Let me show you again. You remember we had Jonathan Cho, our friend at the Discovery Institute, on the show last week, who'd spent some time in downtown Seattle. Do I have to remind you of the horrors playing out on the streets of downtown Seattle? People taking a drug that is literally rotting away their flesh, something called tranq that's leading to amputations, a mixture of fentanyl and animal sedatives. What used to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world, what it has become. And so, yeah, it is terrifying. And I am scared about what could happen starting July 1st in Washington state when we have hundreds of people in King County alone overdosing every single month. But for those Democrats to stand on the House floor and blame anyone other than their own Democratic colleagues is absurd to me. It's gaslighting. It's dishonest. They could have fixed this issue, the entire controversy around Blake, 2 years ago, in a moment, had they exercised common sense and said, hey, all we need to do is add one word to make this law constitutional again. But no, they wanted to continue the effort to decriminalize things, to reduce punishments for people who are breaking the law. And that has led directly to what's playing out on our streets. So look, I share their fear and disappointment that we're in this position, but they truly have no one to blame but themselves. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. I am proud to be an ambassador for Future 42, which is trying to right the ship in Washington state and bring a little bit of balance back to things, which also would have helped us avoid this situation entirely if there was a little bit of balanced government. All right, let's get, did you know there's a beef between Washington and Idaho, and it has played out very publicly over the past few days, and I have to say our governor came out of it looking a little bit ridiculous. Let's get to our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. All right, I'm assuming that a lot of you don't watch MSNBC. If you don't, you might not know that Jay Inslee had an appearance on MSNBC with Ollie Velshi. And it was interesting. I'll bring up the tweet from the governor here. Ollie pegged this interview. This is how he pitched it to his audience. He said, GOP governors often pitch moving to their states with a simple maxim, freedom from government control. But as red state restrictions on abortion, voting, and LGBTQ rights mount, Democratic governors are starting to make the same pitch. Governor Inslee is one of them. So our governor retweeted that and said, Washington state is aggressively defending the rights and freedoms that states like Idaho and Florida are taking away. I'll be talking to Ollie in a few minutes about our efforts. Now, a couple things. It was kind of hard to read the governor's tweets about other states, Republicans aggressively taking freedoms away, when Washington state quite literally just spit on the Second Amendment to our Constitution with a ban on semi-automatic assault rifles. What I'll also say is, look, I don't disagree with aspects of what the governor and MSNBC are saying here. Bear with me. for instance, on abortion issues. I think it is just as bad for a state to say, here's an absolute free-for-all on abortion, as it is for a state to say, here are draconian restrictions on abortion. I believe when it comes to parental rights, we've been talking about Senate Bill 5599 in Washington State, and it's led to this whole conversation around kids and to what extent they should be allowed to get gender care, up to and including gender surgeries. Now, just like I do not agree with Washington State taking the rights away from parents to have a say in their child's care, I also don't agree with Republican states that want to take the right of parents to consent to that care away. And I want to be consistent on that. That to me, it's about parental rights and parents having a right to be involved. So whether you're taking that right away so that kids can get care, or you're taking that right away so kids can't get care, I have an issue with that. But I think it's deeply disingenuous for Governor Jay Inslee to say Washington State is aggressively defending the rights and freedoms that states like Idaho and Florida are taking away, when, like I said, Governor Inslee is picking and choosing what rights and freedoms are important to him, what's important to his party. No one can disagree that we don't have a Second Amendment to the Constitution, and that the semi-automatic assault weapon ban that you passed is going to be ruled unconstitutional. It's just blatantly unconstitutional. Again, you can go about the process of trying to change the Constitution. There's a reason that process exists, but to me, you can't just do a runaround on it. Anyway, it brought up this interesting little tit for tat that Governor Jay Inslee had with Brad Little, who's the governor of Idaho. So Idaho passed a bill that says that children cannot be taken out of state without the knowledge of their parent or guardian for an abortion, which sounds incredibly uncontroversial. Like, again, it goes back to parental rights. If my child wants to get an abortion, my child and I need to have a conversation about that. If it's happening, in a state where abortion is banned, and you agree as a parent, then certainly you should have every right to know if your child is being taken out of state for an abortion. Well, Governor Jay Inslee spoke out against that law, and Governor Brad Little responded. He sent the governor a letter, and they also made it public, because why wouldn't they? Because it's a really good one. And I just want to read it for you. It's dated April 20th. Dear Governor Inslee, thank you for your letter dated April 4th, 2023 regarding House Bill 242, which I signed on April 5th. House Bill 242, now law, does not criminalize, preclude, or otherwise impair interstate travel. Rather, the law seeks only to prevent a minor girl from Idaho. I love that he says girl just because he's inserting the gender in there just in case Governor Inslee had confusion. A minor girl from Idaho from being taken across state lines for an abortion without the knowledge and consent of her parent or guardian. Why do you not support that? The national media's and your efforts to exaggerate and misrepresent the bill only further complicate the process. It is a disservice to our citizens. He goes on to write, Washington, then this gets a little petty. Washingtonians are moving to Idaho and Idahoans are moving to Washington. It's always been that way and probably always will be. Although it is hard to imagine why someone would leave Idaho for Washington when your state is home to sky-high taxes, crime, and public encampments. Meanwhile, Idaho has turned back more tax relief per capita than any other state. We're one of the safest states in the nation, and we don't back down to activists. We kick illegal public encampments off public property. With the U.S. Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade last summer, the right and duty to establish abortion policy was finally returned to our state democratic process. I enclosed a copy of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution for your convenience. So again, a little bit of a petty letter. But also, one, he's right about Governor Jay Inslee misinterpreting their law. And I also find it very interesting that Governor Jay Inslee, and quite unbelievable actually, that with everything happening in our state around crime, around the Blake fix not getting done and him trying to save it at the very last minute after ignoring it entirely, I find it very interesting that Governor Jay Inslee cares so much about taking away parental rights while claiming to care about your rights and freedoms, that he has to speak out publicly and nationally about a common sense bill passed in Idaho that says, no, you can't take my minor child out of state without my consent. And frankly, for any reason, we shouldn't be okay for any reason with taking a child out of state without their parents' consent. And to me, it just shows where Governor Jay Inslee's unbelievable priorities are, that he's trying to score points by speaking out about bills in Idaho, by going on MSNBC to talk about how Washington is the state for freedom and love and understanding, while blatantly violating the Second Amendment to the Constitution, while misinterpreting laws that are being passed in other states, and by working around the clock to degradate? That's not it. To chip away at parental rights. Really quite unbelievable to me. And again, I think that the governor of Idaho, in addition to enclosing a copy of the 10th Amendment, should have also enclosed a copy of the Second Amendment, just for due measure. And that has been our segment, Unbelievable. All right, one of our newest sponsors to the podcast, we'll be adding some other new sponsors coming up as well next week, which is exciting. We love these businesses that are getting on board with the show and the mission and choosing to advertise on here. Sellwithwest.com, sellwithwest.com. If you've been thinking about selling your home, maybe to move to Idaho, who knows, where Brad Little is saucy. So saucy. Actually, we talked to one of the five. Yeah, we talked to Wes Jones, and he was saying that of his clients that he's been helping to sell their home, that Idaho is one of the 5 states that they've been moving to, which is not really a surprise, not only because of proximity, but a much different political environment just across the border. Wes Jones and Associates, they have a really innovative marketing technique, which would come in handy right now with the market having been kind of all over the place, where they want to get the most possible eyeballs on your listing to get you the best possible price. They list it locally, they list it internationally, and just from my conversations with Wes Jones, he said, of course, the market has been just all over the place, volatile, but he sees a window of opportunity where folks can get cash offers again, where they can get offers above the asking price or even competing offers. And so if you're wondering, you need to sell your home, but you're kind of like trying to sit and wait and see what the best time would be, give Wes Jones and Associates a call and just get their advice, because Wes will be honest with you about whether now is the time or whether you should wait a little bit longer, depending on the market. So visit sellwithwest.com. Again, that's sellwithwest.com. A better way to sell your home and maybe move out of the state or just to a different area. I moved out of Seattle a while ago. It's been a very pleasant experience. Although, I'm not going to say where I live because some people are creepy. I'm sure they'll look it up online anyway. Even some of the homeless issues starting to get out to us, which I thought we were far enough away not to have to contend with it. And I went out the day before Earth Day with the dogs, Nicole, and I picked up trash with the dogs because Todd Myers inspired me. We had Todd Myers on the Sunday show, Sundays with Subscribers, and he was talking about the environment and Earth Day and how it's just become, a whole movement to just like virtue signal and stuff as opposed to actually doing things. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the dogs. I'm going to pick up trash by the river. And I was kind of bummed that there was a lot of trash to pick up.
Yes. Well, it's everywhere. And that's why we talk about Seattle stuff. I mean, most of our audience probably is not in Seattle, but we talk about it because it's spreading, because it affects all of us, no matter where we live.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go a little long on the show. It's already an hour and 10 minutes, but we have a lot to discuss. Oh my gosh, we have so much to get to. So I want to jump outside Washington State, get to some national stories. We talked on the beginning of the show about, Tucker Carlson is off Fox News. Don Lemon's off CNN. It's a whole brave new world out there. But anyway, prior to the news about Tucker Carlson, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on MSNBC, did a sit-down interview with Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary. And one of the topics that came up is sort of media censorship or the responsibility of the media in what they say. And of course, there are FCC guidelines around all of that. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, raised the kind of subject of just blatant censorship of the free press. And Jen Psaki, being the good government lapdog that she is, didn't push back at all.
When you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
So I went and looked at the full clip to make sure that wasn't taken out of context, and it wasn't. I was like, Jen Psaki didn't push back. She didn't push back. After that answer, she moved on. And this is the issue with hiring former government lackeys to work in the media. I will say sometimes it can work out, But, you know, I think George Stephanopoulos, for instance, he has done an okay job at making sure his interviews are always firm, and he pushes back and asks good questions. Although, you know, he also clearly has a bias. But, you know, Jen Psaki goes from one day being the mouthpiece for the Biden administration to covering politics for MSNBC. And I know MSNBC isn't supposed to be some sort of like unbiased network. I realize that they just blatantly have a left-leaning bias. But now she's sitting there as a member of the press with a member of Congress, an influential member of Congress in front of her, who is essentially suggesting government overreach when it comes to a free press. And Jen Psaki doesn't push back at all. She could at least pretend. She could at least pretend to push back. So I just wanted to play that because I think it's wild that, you know, you have the media that, from my understanding, there used to be a period where all the media would kind of stick up for each other because they knew if you erode, you know, the rights of one outlet or one reporter, then you erode the institution as a whole. But when you've got now the national media peppered with former government mouthpieces, it's basically the government infiltrating the media. And of course, that's going to lead to a total meltdown.
And to be fair, Kayleigh McEnany, same thing. Right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's on Fox News. It's not just MSNBC.
That's right. I forgot about Kayleigh McEnany. Very undivided of you.
Right.
100%. She does Trump, then she goes on Fox. And again, Fox has a bias. But do we really expect, even in that role, them to be 100% honest in how they operate? Right. Of course not. So it's just this beltway soup, incestual soup situation, right. Which is really, really strange. I think it's a terrible practice, to be honest. Now, if you want to go from a member of the media to working in the political sphere, that's fine. That's different. Then you just don't come back. Anyway, one more national story that I just want to put a pin in it for tomorrow. I cannot believe Joe Biden's going to run again. I am genuinely shook by this. And I might have actually said at one point that I thought there was a 0% likelihood. The man is not capable of running the country right now. And I'm sorry, I'm not saying that from any other perspective than his mental fortitude to do the job. And he was already the oldest president. Imagine 4 more years. And 2024 is still a full year away for the election. And then that would start in 2025. I mean, he'd be pushing 90 by the time he's out of office. And it's insane to me. And so here's the article from the Associated Press about Biden 2024 campaign announcement coming as soon as next week. The expectation is it'll happen tomorrow. Now, I am still of two minds about this. There is still a part of me that thinks this is just a front to avoid having this immediate lame duck situation. And that somewhere along the line, once Democrats figure it out, he'll bow out. Mm-hmm. I still think that is a strong possibility because you will never win. It doesn't matter who goes against him. His approval rating is so low. Like the percentage of Americans who think he's capable of doing his job is so low. If there were to be, as much as I hate this, Trump would beat him.
You think?
Oh my gosh. I don't
not
want to
sure.
think about this. Is this the best we can do?
It's just sad in every respect, but I think that people just want a Dem. It goes back to Fetterman's of the world. It goes back to all of these Dems and Republicans that just get voted in because that's all that's up for the job.
Well, and that's one of the failures of the two-party system is the way things work. Same with Inslee. If Inslee decided to run again, which again, I still am 0%. I think absolutely no chance he's going to run again. People think I'm wrong, but I really think it's 0%. But you see Democrats who won't even announce until he makes his intentions clear. And even if Jay Inslee wants to run for an unprecedented 4th term, Democrats would just be like, okay, you can do it for as long as he wants. That's the issue with the party system, is it keeps other arguably much more qualified and capable people from running out of party loyalty. That's not loyalty to people. That's loyalty to party. And so if Democrats are really going to allow Joe Biden to continue to run the country in his state, that tells you all you need to know about the party system. It's insane. And also, at least there are some Republicans who are planning to run against Trump. At least because Trump's running, right? But DeSantis, I don't know what he's waiting for, but of course he's going to run still. So at least they're going to challenge Trump. It's a little different because Trump's not the current incumbent, and that's sort of considered taboo, but it's just wild. So we'll be following that tomorrow. It's going to be a big story. Obviously, when it happens, it's ridiculous. All right. Nicole gave me a lot of compliments when I came in today because she said I looked really nice in my dress.
I really like that dress. I wish
and
people
why
could
do
see
I
the
look so
whole
nice in my dress?
Oh, well, that's of course because of our sponsor.
Because of the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'll show the people on the video feed my.
Oh,
nice
wow.
Look
Look
at
at you.
Look at that
standing up.
waist. Look at it. Wow, I'm
No
selling
Spanx
this.
required.
No Spanx required. I'm selling this. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. I'm down 35 pounds as of the weekend. 35 pounds on my way to my pre-pandemic weight before Nicole and I go to San Diego for my bachelorette party. Like I've been telling you guys, if I get to my goal weight, I might post a thirsty bikini photo.
Oh.
I mean, it'll be, it'll be an elegant bikini.
Okay.
I mean, it's not going to be like, one of those triangle ones.
Sure.
But, that sells it, right?
That's quite...
Anyway, wow. Eastside Weight Loss Clinic, you need to pay us more for these commercials because we really go off the rails. The best payment is my weight loss. EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. If you're carrying around some extra weight, the nice thing about the program is I lost most of that weight in 2 pounds. Or in 2 pounds. In 2 months. Mm-hmm. So there's only 2 months left before summer. So if you need to lose some weight, and you follow the program, and I mean, you really do have to follow it. It's not magic. You have to eat better. You can get in great shape. I lost like almost 30 pounds of all that weight I lost in 2 months. So you can do that by summer. So EastsideWeightLossClinic.com, EastsideWeightLossClinic.com. Go there, sign up for a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ryan Coogan, and he'll just tell you if the program is right for you, but make sure that you tell them that you heard about them on unDivided with me, Brandi Kruse. Okay, shall we get to comments before I get to my sanity check of the day?
Of course.
Nicole, you want to join me for comments?
Sure thing.
Okay, great. Let's see. Kelly says, corporate media is a thing of the past. Tucker will be just fine. Oh, no doubt that Tucker will be just fine. In fact, I think we're going to find out that it was his choice. I mean, look how much money Joe Rogan makes. At least it's a $40 million deal with Spotify. So on top of that, imagine endorsements. Tucker's going to make way more money. As for Don Lemon, I don't know what Don Lemon's prospects are outside of CNN.
Right. I'm not sure because we talked about him blasting CNN on his way out, saying he wishes that he could have talked to them, and he was given no early.
Oh, yeah. And they sent out something, right?
So they actually sent out a statement saying Don Lemon's statement about this morning's events is inaccurate.
Ooh.
He was offered an opportunity to meet with management, but instead released a statement via Twitter.
Well, I'm curious, though, but did he find out from his agent first? They're not disputing that.
They didn't necessarily dispute that, but he's saying in his tweet, he said he would like a meeting with management. They're saying they offered him one.
Yeah. Well, maybe the Don Lemon will go to where Chris Cuomo went, News Nation. I certainly hope not, because I actually think News Nation's doing well.
So they've already said that News Nation wants both of them, Tucker and Don.
If they hire Don Lemon, then that is totally the antithesis of what News Nation says it's going to be. I actually thought Chris Cuomo had his moments where he was pretty fair. And I think that he's being more fair now that he's not at CNN and he's at News Nation and can be. Mm-hmm. But I still think that was a dumb hire because he had so much baggage attached to him that I thought for News Nation, which is trying to peg itself as a down the middle, News Nation, for instance, one of the main anchors is an anchor I used to work with, Marnie Hughes at Fox 13 in Seattle, who is the epitome of journalistic integrity. Like never even slips and lets on to her opinion at all, like straight down the middle. And that's a great person. And she didn't have overwhelming name recognition nationally. So it was a safe choice to like build a brand. I don't understand Chris Cuomo, Don Lemon when you're trying to build a brand.
I think that they're saying, as long as we hear from both sides, it's okay that one's more divisive than some of the others, I guess. I don't know. I think that's what they're saying. It's kind of like, where we both have worked at Cairo Radio. There are hosts from every side, and some are more divisive than others, right?
I guess. But I don't know that they have any like blatantly to the right hosts on News Nation. They have some that are fair to the right, but I don't think they're blatant to the right.
Yeah,
anyway.
But that's what they're saying. They'd bring on Tucker.
Oh, wait. You're saying that people are asking News Nation?
No, News Nation has already said they'll take either of them. They'll take them both.
Oh, I thought you were saying just Don Lemon.
No.
Oh, Tucker won't go to News Nation. Tucker's going to do his own thing. Okay. Autumn on Patreon writes, Tucker was out because it was probably due to Dominion settlement because I think he crossed the line regarding the issue about slander, but Dems didn't want to get the discovery to get out on Dominion, possibly hacked, so they settled. Don Lemon, since 2020, allowed himself to be tooled by CNN with the racial hysteria post-Floyd and got exactly what he deserved. I just hope they get rid of Joy Reid, too, who also fed the racial hysteria post-Floyd. 100% on the Joy Reid front, I agree. On Patreon, Kyle says, I wonder if Don's recent comments to Vivek Ramaswamy the presidential contender, like just a business guy who's running for president, about race had something to do with his termination. He definitely belittled Vivek's racial background, in my opinion. I had not seen that. Interesting. Paul writes over on Facebook about Governor Jay Inslee. Oh no, Nicole, you copied the same one again. Let's see. On YouTube, Lieutenant Dan says, some Democrats wanted this bill to fail to allow de facto drug legalization. They need to be voted out. I agree. And Lieutenant Dan, man, you have been so firm on our start time. We started on time like every day last week, didn't we?
I believe so.
And Dan's given us crap because we were a minute late today. I had to go to the bathroom, okay? I had to run to the bathroom quick. Kathy on Facebook says, a way for treatment is to criminalize drugs. The problem is lack of staffing due to his mandates. He started the problem. All we're doing is enabling. And I think Kathy makes a good point about, you can push towards treatment, but do you have the facilities and the staff at those treatment locations to be able to deal with an influx of people seeking treatment? Like, we need treatment options. We need enough staff and all of that. But threatening someone with jail time can be a really powerful incentive to get treatment. Barbara on Facebook writes, Democrats in control of all three chambers and somehow blame Republicans for everything. Our beautiful state is being ruined by Democratic policies. I do agree that it's being ruined by some Democratic policies, specifically around public safety. It is absolutely ridiculous. Matt Gilbert says, JT Wilcox is going to run for governor. Let's see what hatches. Oh, I see what you did there with the eggs again. Brian says, probably the only one with enough name recognition, responding to Matt. Jenny says, yes, Wilcox for governor. I don't think he wants it, though. Matthew writes, if he does and loses, he'll have egg on his face. I don't get the feeling that JT wants to run for governor. I mean, his whole spiel was about a younger generation of leaders. And he's a very stupidly controversial figure within the state Republican Party. There is a big chunk of the state Republican Party that has rhinoed him to death. Like, that's what they call him, which is so unproductive and silly. I've told you how I feel about the phrase rhino. In fact, I was speaking at an event over the weekend. I went and spoke to the Log Cabin Republicans, which is the LGBTQ GOP group, and it was their Washington chapter. And it was interesting. I had a great time sitting there and chatting with him. We talked for like more than 3 hours and took their questions. But there was one particular person in the group who said he used to listen to my show until I said I hate the word rhino, and then he wouldn't listen anymore. And I'm like, I hate the word rhino. I think it is so counterproductive when you're in the minority to further divide the ranks of your own party when you can't even win with everyone in your party. It's silly. It's silly. Okay, I'll fit a couple more in. Diana said on Patreon, where are your priorities, Brandi? We now have a state dinosaur. That's true. They did get that done. The Susiosaurus Rex. Kidding aside, I sure hope this mess blows back on the Democrats come election day. I mean, you'd think so. Common sense would tell us that's the case, but I've been wrong before. I mean, 2022, I really thought would be a disaster for Democrats, but it just simply wasn't. Let's end with Stacy on YouTube. So I can use drugs out in the open with no legal consequences, but I can't build a shed on my property without government approval and oversight. Ridiculous. I feel you, man. There are some times where I'm like, I just want to rip like the good to go thing off my car, and I want to not pay for parking and just dare them to like fine me and stuff so I can be like, hey, you guys allow all of this, but I have to follow all the rules.
Right. And earlier, Paul was talking about gaslighting. He said, I hate when Inslee gaslights. And yeah, that was a lot of comments. I mean, It is clear gaslighting.
It is. And people think
unproductive.
I use that word too much. No, politicians do it too much.
Absolutely.
If they didn't do it so much, I wouldn't have to use the word so much. Man, we are way over time. I will note that I put a little poll in the live chat on YouTube asking you guys, do you think lawmakers will make a deal on drug possession before July 1st? 32% of you said yes. 68% said no. I hope you're wrong, but at this point, if it comes down to cities doing their own thing, then so be it. All right, let's end the show as we always end the show with a sanity check. So as we mentioned, Washington state lawmakers failed at what should have been one of their top priorities this legislative session, and that is to come up with a new law around drug possession in Washington state so that starting July 1st, drug possession wasn't de facto legalized in our state. Of course, they were completely incapable of doing that. It came down to the last possible minute. Democrats brought a weak bill to the floor, apparently didn't do a good job counting votes, and then they watched it fail in epic fashion. Now, immediately after that, just a few minutes after the session ended, Governor Jay Inslee had a press conference, and he essentially suggested that they would have to call a special session to get this issue done before July 1st, to which any reasonable person should say, what makes you believe that you can get something done in a special session that you could not get done in the 4 months that we gave you to do it, when that should have been, if not priority number 1, at least priority number 2? And as I was stewing and steaming over that issue, the fact that you really going to call a special session for something that you had 4 months to accomplish, I had TVW still on in the background, and they proceeded to carry out their sine die ceremony. So sine die is their phrase for the last day of the legislative session. It's Latin. And up on the screen during this, and I've watched it a few times in the past, but this is the first time I really sat through it and watched it. They've got the House chamber and the Senate chamber up on the screen. And they're going through this ceremonial process of bringing the legislative session to a close. And after that happened, I just sat and watched for a couple minutes. The jubilance of lawmakers in the room. Listen.
I move that the 2023 session of the 68th Legislature adjourn sine die.
The Senate is adjourned.
2, 1.
Sine die.
We are adjourned.
What in the actual F are you clapping about? What on God's green earth do you have to be excited about?
That they get to sleep regular hours again.
You just ended a legislative session with a spectacular failure. And you just left us in a position where we are racing toward de facto drug legalization in a state already dealing with record drug overdoses and crime related to substance abuse. And you have the audacity just a few minutes later to celebrate as if you earned it. And yes, I understand that you had 4 months and it was very long, hard work, but you also asked for that job. You asked for that responsibility. And you did not accomplish in those 4 months the very basics of what is expected of you as public servants, and that is to keep people safe. And so forgive me if I want to throw up in my mouth a little bit, that just minutes after failing to ensure that drug possession would remain a crime in our state, so more people wouldn't die on the streets, so more people wouldn't be victimized over substance abuse. Forgive me if I got a little bit of vomit taste in my mouth over you sitting there and clapping like absolute clowns. Shame on each and every one of you. It is truly insane that you think you have anything to celebrate. All right, that's been it for our show today. A little bit of overtime. We had a lot to discuss, and we have a lot of interviews coming up on the show this week with lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. And I'm going to ask them why they felt the need to clap. Do you think you deserve to celebrate? Am I being too mean?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that some of them feel like they did accomplish some things, but I don't know. I kind of agree with you. Right after you failed on the Blake.
One of the most basic things you should have done this session.
Exactly.
And then some of them were wearing hats, like party hats after that. I was like, you guys look like absolute.
It was a bit much.
Imbeciles. All right, if you have not already signed up and subscribed to the show, please join us. You get exclusive content like an op-ed I dropped yesterday on parental rights in our state, and our Sundays with Subscribers Weekly episode where we have in-depth conversations on important issues. So go to undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. It's your one-stop shop for all things Undivided. Figure out how to watch the show, listen to the show, contact the show, or subscribe to support the show and to get those bonus features. Thank you to everyone who joined us on the live show today. We will see you back here at noon tomorrow.